Hello and welcome. My name is Randy Bell, and I am the director of the Global Energy Center at the Atlantic Council. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the second of four special events the Atlantic Council is hosting virtually as part of Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week. We were supposed to be in Abu Dhabi this week for our annual Global Energy Forum, which is a part of Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week, but due to COVID case numbers in the US and Europe, we decided to postpone until March 28th and 29th. We will have more information on the plan for the forum in March in the coming weeks. Now, today's session is part of the launch of the Global Energy Center's flagship annual publication, the Global Energy Agenda. This is the second edition of this volume, which aims to set the terms of the energy debate for the year ahead. To better understand the key issues facing the energy system in 2022, the Atlantic Council Global Energy Center commissioned a series of essays from global experts, corporate leaders, and government ministers. The center also surveyed a global group of energy leaders, asking them a dozen high-level energy and climate questions. The results are compiled in the Global Energy Agenda, which I encourage you to read. We'll put the link for this publication in the chat. Our panel today includes 5 of the essay authors who will discuss their essays as well as other key trends and issues for energy in 2022 as the world continues to grapple with the pandemic, manage an energy price spike, and increase climate ambition. It is my pleasure to introduce our fantastic speakers today. Francesco Lacamera, the Director General of the International Renewable Energy Agency. Halima Croft, the Managing Director and Head of Global Commodity Strategy at RBC Capital Markets. Dan Freed, Atlantic Council Weiser Family Distinguished Fellow and former U.S. Ambassador to Poland. Maji Jaffer, CEO of Crescent Petroleum. And Mele Kyari, the Group Managing Director at the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation. This tremendous group will be moderated by CNBC anchor Hadley Gamble. Hadley will be taking questions from the audience, so please, if you have any questions, just put them in the Q&A function on Zoom. Hadley, over to you.
Fantastic stuff, Randy. Thank you so much. And thank you so much, panelists, for joining us. I'm thrilled to be a part of this conversation. Obviously, everything that we've seen happening over the last 6 months and even the last several days has upended, in a sense, many of the predictions for 2022. One of the things that I'd love to do is get just a very quick round robin from all of our panelists, just 1 minute quickly, to tell us your top 3 predictions for 2022. And I'm talking about price volatility, the potential for geopolitical headwinds, and also, of course, the ability or inability for OPEC plus members, if you will, to get to their 400,000 plus barrels a day. I want to get now to Dr. Halima Croft to give us her top 3 predictions for 2022. On the hot seat.
On the hot seat, my top, number 1 prediction is it's all going to come down to Saudi Arabia when we talk about OPEC plus. I mean, this is really going to be a big bilateral push, I think, for the Biden administration to try to get Saudi Arabia to put more barrels on the market, because we know the spare capacity just resides in a few number of countries in the region that you sit in. So I think it's going to be an important challenge. I think it's going to be also very, very important to watch, obviously what happened to the Russia-Ukraine situation, because that, I believe, is the path to $100 a barrel oil. And we should be watching, of course, what happens with Iranian nuclear negotiations, because I think that's a very, very important wild card with 1 million barrels of exports potentially in balance. So over to you, Hadley.
Francesco, I'd love you to weigh in on this one as well, because obviously there was so much coverage about COP26. And even in my part of the world, there's a lot of momentum building to what's going to happen next year in Egypt, and also, of course, the following year in Saudi Arabia and in the UAE as well.
So if you talk what's going to happen, I think that and we refer to the COP, the one in Glasgow and then the one coming in Egypt and UAE. I think that we are moving from the negotiation mood to the action mood in this arena work. So what we see is more attention and in the implementation and action, as also we have been received in our General Assembly that took place a few days ago, where there was this attention from the membership and also from the stakeholders how to translate into the reality the commitment and pledge that came from the high-level dialogue of energy in New York and COP26 in Glasgow. So this moved to action, I think, that will dominate this year and hopefully the years to come.
I'd love to bring in now Majid Jafar as well, because you have this sort of regional perspective, but you and I have so often talked about a price perspective in the year ahead. What do prices look like in 2022?
So I think, well, first prediction, I'll echo on higher energy prices and volatile. And I think both in oil and even more on gas, what we've seen already, I think that will continue. My second would be on the realization that, as we heard from Dr. Sultan in the opening session of the series yesterday, it is a transition. It's not the flick of a switch. And as he said, you can't just unplug the current energy system in making that transition. And I think that's starting to become apparent and recognized even in places like Europe, that underinvestment, which has been chronic and now acute in oil and gas, is leading to both more burning of coal and higher energy costs. So it's actually harmful for the economy and for tackling climate change. And the third is that the voice of the developing world, which appeared at COP26, but was still drowned out in many ways. And I think the fact that the next two meetings are going to be in Africa and here then in the UAE, COP27 and COP28, is giving hope that there will be more representation and the voice of the developing world heard. And it must be, because a successful and sustainable energy policy must address the need for affordable and reliable energy in the developing world. We have almost 1 billion people with no electricity, and that number has unfortunately gone up during COVID, and over 3 billion people without clean cooking solutions yet. So those are my predictions, I think, for the coming year.
Mr. Meli Kiari, welcome, sir. I just want to ask you to weigh in on that one, because I think obviously when we're talking about it from the perspective of the developing world, it's a very different scenario, what you're seeing in Nigeria, for example.
Thank you very much, Hadley. Key thing is that I don't like predictions because nobody ever gets it right. And of course, what we see, probably, maybe forecast with better word, probably a $70 to $80 oil through the year and probably well into 2023. That's probably what may play out for many reasons, just like Majid said. There was acute underinvestment in 2020. It flew into 2021, and you can't wish the outcome of that underinvestment into reality. That means that, you know, the production system that was lost over the last 2 years, you can't recover them overnight. And the supply gap that you're seeing today in the market will be sustained for another year or so, which means that, you know, you continue to see demand outweighing supply. Despite all the COVID situation, you know, we are now seeing that the demand level hasn't really fallen down. So what I think, and most important for resource-dependent country like mine, or in developing countries here, you know, the key thing for us is actually transiting from a situation of acute poverty of a sort to some kind of a level of comfort and prosperity. And that's the bigger transition that we're facing here. And of course, that comes with it, energy poverty and very many other poverties that we have. So for us, getting this gap filled in the next 1 to 2 years is a major endeavor for us. And of course, that doesn't eliminate any other possibility around the energy transition journey, but we do have a key challenge here. And for our country, high prices may not be absolutely good, but we think that it can help us. And of course, going straight to what you asked around the spare capacity, whether or not we can get them back to run, I doubt it extremely, because with the best of intention and with the loss of 2 years of investment, you can hardly get back that spare capacity to flow. So it may be a tough thing getting the 400,000 barrels on the table.
Let me weigh in on this one in terms of the price volatility. Obviously, you said in your predictions that Saudi Arabia will be the swing question, if you will, of 2022. But when you take a step back and think about the geopolitical risk involved in all of this, what does the price volatility look like to you? Are we going to see $100?
I think we are.
Sorry, I thought you were talking to me, Hadley. I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry. No, I was just bringing in Halima.
Oh, I will jump in quickly. I mean, I think we are basically, you know, an invasion away from $100 barrel oil. Like, if you ask me what is the path to $100? I do think if we did see a potential Russian invasion of Ukraine, that would be the potential path to 100. But we saw simply what has happened in the last couple of days in the region with, Houthi attacks. I mean, we're already now talking about when do we break 90? And so I do think that this is a market that is going higher, that is overly basically saying that Omicron is manageable. And so I think the real question is, who can bring barrels onto the market to potentially cap this upside?
What does this look like over the next decade, if you will, Francesca? I mean, when you think about the energy transition and in terms of that price volatility, because it seems as if, at least from the external, from the perspective of the journalist, if you will, that policymakers just really wanted to do a bit of greenwashing potentially, but also just didn't have a handle on how quickly or how slowly that transition was going to take place, or they would have planned better.
So,
and by the way, it's easy to sit in the cheap sheets about this. I get it.
Just to make a point on this, trying to reflect also on this volatility of oil prices. So this lack of resilience in the system that is there. So when we talk about the future of this decade and what could be the solution, we have to ask ourselves, the technical solution we are thinking about are the most cost efficient. So what are the technologies that today are most competitive and cheapest way to produce energy? Second, what are the technologies that ensure more resilience in the system? Third, what are the technologies can ensure us to be in line with the Paris Agreement goals? Fourth, what are the technologies that ensure that the energy transition will also, reduce the inequality existing today in the world? And as far as I can answer to this question, the only way to have yes, 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 yes is going faster and faster toward renewables. And so a system that is going to the electrification, more energy efficient, and enabled by renewables and complemented by green hydrogen and mainly green hydrogen, and sustainable biomass, I think is the response to the question that you posed to me. And evidently, if I can make another comment, 1 minute, that the market will not bring us there, in the sense that policies in this moment of the energy transition is very, very relevant to ensure that the transition we are going to manage will be in line in the Paris Agreement goal, because it's just not to be agree on a goal. It's just to avoid the dramatic costs of not be able to achieve the Paris Agreement goals.
I think that's a great viewpoint to go into our next question, which of course would be with Ambassador Fried. I mean, when you take a step back and think about this with regards to the geopolitical narrative, I spent several days in Ukraine last week. Prior to that, I was covering the story from Brussels and Geneva and speaking to the foreign minister, on the vice prime minister as well in the president's office. The narrative coming out of Ukraine today, significantly different from what I heard from President Putin in October. He essentially saying to me multiple times that the reason they weren't pumping more gas through the Ukraine pipeline had to do specifically with the failures of that pipeline. He said it was leaking gas. He said it was economically not viable. And when I speak to the Ukrainians, they tell me that that is pig swoggle, if you will. When you think about this with regards to what happens next and the potential for the price volatility to continue in the European gas market, how worried should the rest of the world be at this point?
Worried. The Ukrainians are right, by the way. Putin is speaking nonsense, but that nonsense signals Russia's likely next move. If there is an escalation of military tensions between Ukraine and Russia, the Russians are likely to cut off the gas transiting Ukraine. They're likely then to turn to the Germans and the Europeans and say, we can make up this shortfall, but you will have to put Nord Stream 2 online and give it the full regulatory permission. And of course, the Russians are likely to blow up the pipelines if they want, transit pipelines to Ukraine. So that is I would say, even a likely Russian play, that they will use energy as a weapon. And there's more they can do. If they attack Ukraine and the Americans and Europeans follow with sanctions against the Russian financial system, which is likely, the Russians may then retaliate by refusing to sell any oil to the United States. They're selling a lot. Russia is now a major oil supplier for the US because the US has replaced Venezuelan oil with Russian oil. So although I am the least qualified person on this in this discussion to talk about energy, I agree with what I heard. Prices are going up in general, and they may well or even likely to spike in the event of an escalation of Russian aggression against Ukraine. Now, the Biden administration is not exactly blind or passive. They're not waiting for this dumbfounded or paralyzed. Amos Hochstein, you all probably know him, the energy security coordinator at the State Department, is on the case. US LNG is finally flowing to Europe. I suspect that Amos is looking for additional oil supplies. Somebody said, I think it was Helena Croft, who said, yeah, where is the additional supply coming from? Spot on. I think these are the questions the Biden administration needs to be working on right now, so that it's not looking stupid when this scenario plays out, as I think is likely.
Halima, weigh in there. I just wanted you to ask, or you to respond to that. Essentially, where are those oil supplies going to come through? Why are they not coming from US producers?
Well, I mean, one of the real problems, though, Hadley, is that, U.S. production will grow this year, likely to grow particularly in the back half of the year, because, in this high price environment, that will incentivize more U.S. barrels. But spare capacity, the ability to bring on oil quickly, has always resided in the Gulf. And so comes down to, again, the bilateral ask that's going to have to be made of Saudi Arabia in the event of a Russian invasion of Ukraine and prices going to 100, even before we start talking about potential disruption of exports, potential infrastructure damage. The immediate ask is going to have to be to Saudi Arabia, and Amos is, fantastic, but that is going to be a call President Biden is likely going to have to make to the Saudi Crown Prince to ask for those barrels.
And he's not exactly in a great political position to do that, considering what he said about Saudi Arabia, not just in the campaign, but since then. Majid, you have a very unique position out here. You understand the dynamics of what's been going on, not just in the energy market and the energy space privately, but also, of course, in the political angle as well. What's your sense of how much leeway or how much leverage President Biden might have when speaking to Gulf producers?
So, there are always short-term geopolitical impacts and volatility when it comes to energy markets. That's always been the case and likely always will be the case. And I'll leave commentary on that to those more qualified. My bigger concern is the longer-term trends we're seeing in the underinvestment. We're 25% lower investment in the upstream than pre-COVID, but half the level of a decade ago. So I think there needs to be this realization that oil and gas is still going to be needed. It's just how we produce it will be cleaner and how we use it will be different. And as an example, us as Crescent Petroleum, 50 years operating here in the region, we've gradually transitioned more from oil to gas. We're now 85% gas. We reduced our flaring to near zero. And by offsetting the remainder, we actually declared net zero, not in 2050, but last October. But more importantly than that, the gas we actually produce in the region displaces diesel for electricity that actually avoids more emissions than all the Teslas on the planet. And I think that impact is underappreciated. Yes, solar and wind power costs have come down and they're very promising, but the energy from them can't be stored. So you need stable background sources like natural gas or nuclear, as the UAE's energy policy has demonstrated. And on the oil side, even if cars become electric and they're still made from products of oil, as are solar panels, wind turbines. And if we just look at the COVID pandemic, everything we've relied on, from smartphones, masks, sanitizers, and vaccines, are all made from oil products. And I think that message is being underappreciated, and the underinvestment in the upstream, it's partly cyclical energy prices, but it is also, the climate activism that's been so successful now. It's harming the current energy infrastructure, which ironically is tackling climate change worse, because energy demand is still going up and coal burning is now increasing. And the biggest irony was COP26, the day they were calling for an end of coal, the whole venue was actually being kept warm by coal because the wind had stopped blowing and there was insufficient gas storage in the UK.
Yeah, I mean, it was a story we were covering, and every day seemed to just bring more headlines of the same. I just want to, guys, draw your attention to something that the Global Energy Agenda put together within this fantastic report, which is, of course, what's going to be the most important cause of energy price volatility over the next 10 years, over the next decade. And just in terms of the numbers, in terms of the percentage of respondents, the geopolitical question, 28% of respondents said that would be the cause of the most price volatility over the next 10 years. 29% said underinvestment, which we've just touched on, and 34% were talking about the market fundamentals in terms of COVID-19 or weather pattern changes. And we're talking about climate, of course. I want to ask Mele to bring us in on this, in the sense that we're talking about Nigeria specifically, but broaden that out a little bit in terms of underinvestment and the idea that transitioning as a result of what we're seeing globally with COP26, COP27, and what's going to happen with COP28 here in the UAE in a couple of years, the necessity to get to that transition as quickly as possible. What's your greatest concern there?
Yeah, what we see here is, of course, we're seeing the real impact of underinvestment. Our production numbers are going down for very many reasons. We are unable to put more money into our business. And this came as a result of COVID-19 years, but more especially because of the failure of financial institutions to finance some of our fossil fuel-based businesses. So that's very clear. The impact is very, very obvious. We're taking a different strategy out of this. We know for sure that gas will be the transition for in our case. And of course, we have more gas than oil in Nigeria. Therefore, what we're doing is we're building an infrastructure around gas so that, we can transit, gracefully while we're paying attention to the renewables as we go forward. But for the oil itself, the underinvestment has two components. One of them is the mere fiscal environment that we have in our country, and most of the resource-dependent countries in sub-Saharan Africa. This, of course, had a lot of impact on non-investment in our country, and this has been resolved in a way because we have a very new fiscal environment. Investors are seeing the opportunities. Engagements with our partners is showing very clear signal that the money can come back to our business. So we are transiting gradually and gracefully, but definitely, there is an energy gap. There's energy poverty in this part of the world, and that can't be handled as quickly as we want, except we're able to grow our gas businesses, and this is what we are focused on.
Francesco, come in on this one, because I want to ask you specifically about COP26 with the idea that we're looking forward to 27 and to 28. Obviously, a major topic of conversation here in the UAE over the last several months, that big win for them in terms of bringing COP to the UAE, a petrodollar economy, if you will. When you think about this a bit more broadly in terms of underinvestment, but also the great worries with not achieving that transition quickly enough, not just as a result of policy kerfuffles or mistakes, but also, of course, because the world needs energy and they need the most available and cheap energy possible. And that's what we're seeing, at least in terms of the coal narrative that Majid was mentioning. There's an the outcome of COP26 on a scale to 1 to 5 within the Global Energy Agenda. And the numbers are rather staggering. How would you assess the outcome of COP?
I think it's clear that there's absolute commitment from the world. My country has committed to 2060 net carbon net zero situation. So of course you can't do that except you have a plan. We have a very clear plan. First of all, we transit through gas, and in the next 10 years, we'll take gas to maximum, and as we'll also decline oil, considerably in the next 10 years. And once you're able to do this and you're able to build on the back of that, the renewables, then clearly 2060 is not far-fetched. And I think that's what most people are doing. Some can commit to 2050, but we can see 2060 as a very realistic timeline. And of course, the energy industry in this country moving gradually into a gas-based industry rather than the liquid. So we continue to decline the liquid production as a matter of strategic plan, grow the renewable contribution to the energy mix, and then ultimately peak gas in 10 years' time and then start a decline. And I believe this will work.
Francesca, weigh in on this, because it also gets, of course, very political. We've been talking so much about the European energy dynamic, what happened in Germany with regards to nuclear energy, what's happening right now within France. I mean, obviously, Mr. Macron is under some pressure, but people are harking back to the fact that, you know, they didn't, as opposed to Germany, get rid of their nuclear plants. How do you see the transition today? Are you worried about how quickly it's going to move forward as a result of what we've seen over the last year?
I think the circumstances are different by location and by geography. We have quite different issues around here, just as much as you have different issues in Germany and all that. So what they need to cut down is not what we need to cut down, what we need to focus on, not necessarily what they need to focus on. There's a very different game. And we believe that, you know, going the way of gas is the best way for us to contribute to that change. And of course, others will do it very, very differently. But overall, if you put it in a basket, you know, I think that the 2050 is realistic.
Melly, thank you for that. Just wanted to bring in Francesca Lacamera on that specifically. I mean, where do you see us at this point? How worried are you that the transition is going to be forestalled?
I have no worry about that. You know, the trend of the energy transition, so the move to a clean energy system is already here from a decade. And we see that the installed capacity of renewables is systematically outpaces the traditional one. There are naturally geopolitical implications on all this, and we have just published for your attention also the geopolitics on the clean energy system, but this time focusing on hydrogen. Because when we talk about the stability of the energy system, we have to think that green hydrogen can play the double role to be the storage and the carrier of energy. We have assisted to the dramatic decrease of the cost of storage. The problem is, I have no doubt that the energy transition will be there, will continue, and will be not stopped, because it's the going for renewables, if you want or not, is the most competitive way to produce energy. This is not an opinion; it's just a fact. Naturally, as has been said has been repeated, going to a new energy system, that doesn't mean that you can unplug the existing one. There is naturally a transition. The transition has to be happen and take into account the different circumstances in the different country. The only thing that is clear, and the world has committed to reduce the emission of CO2 by 45% in 2030. So what we are doing has to be coherent with this objective. This applies for the US, this applies for China, this applies for all the countries in the world. So this is very, very clear also in this region. So this is important that you wish to highlight for having a COP in Egypt, can say how can Africa can accelerate its path. Because the question is the timing, is the time, is the scale, is not the direction of travel. The direction of travel is there. There is no way. But what is in the end of the politics is the speed and the scale of this path. So Egypt could be absolutely interesting to see what could be done for Africa. And the UAE, they are showing that it's possible. You call this a petrodollar country. This is the country where they are already selling green hydrogen around the world. So the COP28 can demonstrate how it's possible to go for a cleaner energy system.
Yeah.
This at least is my assessment, and at the same time, my hope.
So the idea is the possibilities are endless, but at the same point, we're still existing in the current energy dynamic. I just want to draw your attention to one of the polls that was done as part of the Global Energy Agenda from the Atlantic Council. What is the most important cause of the current energy price spike? And only 19% of respondents said it was the geopolitical risk. The majority, 48%, essentially said, you know, this is about COVID-19, this is about existential, this is about the extreme weather, this is about the market fundamentals as a whole, the bigger picture, if you will. I want to bring in Ambassador Fried on this one, because in the last 24 hours, we've heard from the German foreign minister essentially saying that if Ukraine were to be invaded by Russia, Nord Stream 2 would then be brought to a halt, but it took them a good 10 days to finally put Nord Stream 2 on the line as a piece of this agenda. And folks that we speak to across the board say that this was a major part of the geopolitical puzzle, if you will, in this chess game that they're playing, all of the West with Vladimir Putin at this point. When you take a step back and think about this, I mean, was Nord Stream 2, in terms of putting energy at the forefront of their economic agenda, the Germans, was this the greatest mistake that you see Europe having made in the great game since the fall of the Soviet Union?
Europe, energy, and Russian dependence. What a mess. So this issue has existed since the Reagan administration. The Reagan administration warned the Europeans, particularly the Germans, about developing a dependency on Russian gas and oil. The Reagan administration backed off. It allowed the pipeline to go through. The Europeans, particularly the Germans, deluded themselves for decades, thinking that Russia would never use energy as a weapon, in defiance of the actual Russian record of using energy as a weapon. Nord Stream 2 has taken on perhaps an outsized symbolism as central to this debate. It's a nasty geopolitical project. Nevertheless, I have some sympathy for the Biden administration's approach, which was not trying to kill it with sanctions, but trying to get the Germans to use compensatory measures and other measures to attenuate the leverage it gave Moscow. So I have some sympathy for the Biden administration's approach. Now the Germans, after public inconsistencies, like ministers contradicting each other with like day to day, they finally see
it's a problem when you have a coalition government, isn't it?
Well, they had approached almost American administration levels of disunity. As an American former official, I'm used to this stuff. All the journalists know exactly what I'm talking about, right? Different voices, people stabbing each other in the back. That's the Washington way. And the Germans were doing some of this too. However, I don't want to be too rough on them. They seem to have found their way to a reasonable place, which is roughly this. If the Russians attack, they will pull the plug on Nord Stream 2. That's a big deal. That's not easy. I don't want to knock this. Then there's the question, okay, are the Germans ready for the consequences? Are they looking for alternative gas supplies, mainly LNG? Well, they'd better. And the US had better be helping them. Secondly, what constitutes their line for action? What's their trigger point? Yeah, if the Russian tanks roll in, sure. Suppose it's short of that. I mean, I could give you half a dozen scenarios for gray zone, almost but not quite full-scale war that are available to the Kremlin. So it's going to be a difficult issue, but at least the Germans are beginning to get themselves in a better position. Oh, by the way, take a look at the US-German joint statement last summer on Nord Stream 2. It's not binding, it's awkwardly worded in parts, but it nevertheless commits Germany to take strong action, including sanctions, on Russian exports to Europe if Russia uses gas or energy as a weapon against Ukraine. I mean, go read it. It's not that long. Germany needs to step up and recognize that this joint statement means something. And the US needs to keep doing what it's doing, which is to give the Germans some space to figure it out. A lot of my colleagues are super mad at the Germans, and I get why, right? Their energy policy doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, get out of nuclear and get out of coal, and then try to lower your dependence on Russian gas. Like, hello, even a non-expert knows that there's something wrong with this picture. Nevertheless, we all have our politics. The Germans are not the problem. They made a policy mistake, but they are not the problem. Putin.
Before I let you go on that one, the policy mistake, Angela Merkel, does this rest squarely on her?
Squarely? No, you gave me an easy way out. Squarely. She was wrong. And I think highly of her in many, many ways. But on Nord Stream 2, the Germans were wrong. Okay? The Poles and Ukrainians who criticized Nord Stream 2 were right. And by the way, let's just stipulate that Germans should never tell Poles to keep calm about the Russians. Like, no. But a policy mistake
Truth.
is not the same thing as strategically capitulating to the Russians. I'm an American ex-official. I know all about policy mistakes. Allies help allies climb out of them.
So speaking of policy mistakes, I mean, Halima, I guess it brings it back to you in a sense, because you're sort of sitting on the front lines there in the United States. I mean, when you think about policy mistakes, Amos Hochstein's name was brought up in terms of being the energy advisor, the energy envoy, if you will, to the region. I've interviewed him several times in the last couple of months, and he's made very little headway with Gulf energy producers. I mean, in terms of policy mistakes, can we then sit back and say, okay, if you look at this big picture, has the Biden team made a severe policy mistake by essentially saying to the US oil and gas energy sector as a whole, like, take a seat, take a back seat to what's going to happen, because we're going to basically outsource our energy narrative to the rest of the world, including OPEC plus?
I mean, I think Amos actually did achieve a victory that doesn't get a lot of credit. Like, if you go back to the December OPEC meeting, when we had the Omicron scare, we didn't know what was going to happen in terms of demand. I do think the reason that OPEC plus proceeded with 400,000 barrels a month when they could have hit the pause button was because Amos and a team went to Riyadh and essentially said, look, we've done this SPR release, but we do want OPEC to go forward, even though there's uncertainty about Omicron. I think the real question is now, it's going to be a real test of diplomacy and the US position in the Gulf in terms of saying, we need more from you. And I think it comes down to questions about what do we have to offer? I mean, there was this Houthi attack that underscores that threat remains ever present to big Gulf producers. Does the US have to potentially provide more Patriot missiles to the Saudis? Do we have to provide more defense support to the Saudis in order to get more barrels? I think that's going to become a really important diplomatic question, is what do we have to do to get more barrels? And no one thought they were going to be there, Hadley. Remember when this administration took office, it was all about net zero ambitions. And now they're finding that US consumers are really, really upset about higher gasoline prices. It wasn't the top issue in the gubernatorial races in Virginia and New Jersey, but higher gasoline prices did feature prominently in terms of voter concerns. And so the Biden administration just has to walk this tightrope right now.
Yeah, it's coming, the midterms. I mean, it's definitely going to be a part of the agenda. I just want to take one quick question from the audience. It's a great one. It's for Majid. Benjamin Cross just essentially saying he feels that you're right in your assessment of the overall energy situation, but he's saying, how do you get people, especially decision makers, policymakers, to understand this energy transition, the situation, and to plan out everything in a logical and realistic manner? Because it really does play into what we've been talking about in terms of the situation in Europe, what's happening in the United States. I mean, it's a top-down society where we are, Majid, but at the end of the day, I mean, they do take a lot of the things that the private sector says on board. How do you think you ensure that transition comes in a way that actually makes sense, both for the producers and the consumers?
So here in the UAE, there's a very logical energy strategy for 2050 with net zero targets and about 40% natural gas, backing up 40% renewables and then nuclear. I think the challenge, what we've just been hearing in the conversation, whether it's in the United States and Europe, and I'll, aside from the politics, what I'm seeing is cursing the fact of increasing dependence on imports, whether it's from Russia on gas or OPEC, while discouraging your own production at home. And US production hasn't been growing. European gas, including the UK, production is down 30% in the last 5 years. And that is driven in large part, it's increasing dependence on imports. And the UK got rid of its gas storage, which is why it's seen incredible spikes of late. So my real concern is I see a danger of climate policies making people colder and poorer and then getting rejected. And the planet can't afford that. And it's in large part because of this, short-termism, flipping, as you mentioned in Germany, a local election made them suddenly turn off the nuclear. Their energy, for me, should be as long-term and expert informed as something like defense policy. I mean, you don't rely on unqualified politicians, let's say, to determine defense procurement without expertise. Unfortunately, when it comes to energy policy, that's what you see. The flavor of the month. Oh, let's all run in this direction. Then a new government.
Well, you
comes
see a
in.
lot of that in the United States with two-term congressmen, but that's another story for another time. No, I get it. I get it. I want to actually bring in.
Energy investments are long-term and very capital intensive. And this is why you need stability of policy making and long-term planning. And there's been a dearth of that in many Western countries.
I want to bring this question. It comes from Megan Richards. She's essentially talking about the US LNG going to Europe from, it's a pittance by comparison to what could be provided by not just the Ukrainian pipeline, but Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2. And she's essentially saying, if Russia stops the transit of gas via Ukraine, can Norway ramp up position? And in terms of what they've got, talking about LNG coming from Qatar, who's going to make up the difference if we see this geopolitical narrative shifting to, frankly, a Russian invasion of Ukraine? I mean, what does that actually look like in terms of getting gas to Europe? I'd love to take this with Francesco as well as the ambassador.
Ashley, and this conversation is very interesting. Also, if I have to listen to this conversation from my point of view. And we talk about the needs for long-term strategy. Imagine this discussion in 10 years or in 20 years, when we finally will be able to leave behind us a fossil fuel system that is centralized, that is possible to cartelize, that is possible to weaponize, and change going to an energy system that is decentralized, based on renewables, with hydrogen, mainly green hydrogen, ensuring to be the carrier and the source of energy, able to electrify the heavy industries. A debate like this in 20 years or in 50 years from now, I strongly hope will have no sense.
Well, certainly in terms of the idea of being able to weaponize it. Ambassador Fried, I mean, you've had a front row seat to all of this, not just as ambassador, but amongst your colleagues as well. The ability to weaponize energy. It's a part of the broader narrative. And it's something I asked Vladimir Putin in October, which of course he denied twice.
He would.
How vulnerable are we? And who benefits? Are we talking about the US LNG? Are we talking about the Qatari LNG? Who's in the position to benefit from what's happening right now in Europe? Beyond Mr. Putin.
Right. You anticipated my first answer. Beyond this, the question, and as I said, I'm not the person to ask. I'm the least qualified person in this discussion to answer that question. Where are the additional sources of oil? Where are the additional sources of LNG? In the short run, prices are going to go up. That's going to release more sources of LNG and oil. Prices will spike in Europe. More LNG will go to Europe. That's going to be difficult. I mean, there's no way to pretend otherwise. In the longer term, of course, the transition to renewables and probably some form of nuclear is going to change this radically. It's one of the laws of policymaking that you overestimate what you can achieve in the short run and underestimate what you can achieve in the long run. So keep working on the long run solutions. That's the answer to getting us out of this mess. Putin, on some level, knows it. Without reforms and the rule of law, Russia is going to remain a value-extracted economy. As the world transitions from fossil fuels, that commodity-based Russian economy is going to decline. It will not be replaced by anything until and unless the Russian economy allows genuine entrepreneurship, which means the rule of law, to enter into Russia. That is antithetical to Putinism. So you see Putin's dilemma. He's acting now at a position of relative strength, because in the out years, the longer we go, the relatively weaker the Russian economic model becomes. But the short term, that's going to bite. That's really hard. Watch Amos Hochstein. he's the rare example of somebody who's both a policy wonk who knows the details and politically savvy. He knows how to survive in the policy world. Political, not partisan. Okay, you need to be politically smart to make it. He's exactly the right person at the right time, but I don't envy him his position. It is not easy.
So Hadley, if I might just chime in.
Yeah, jump in.
We're mentioning Amos, the idea that moving to renewables is suddenly going to mean that we're all independent from geopolitics. Yeah. Let's focus on an important fact I actually learned from Amos, which is, if you look at OPEC, it's about 30% of world oil. If you look at renewables, 70 to 80% of all components or raw materials that are linked to renewables are either owned or controlled by China, one state. So the idea that, geopolitics is all going to be away and we're free of weaponization moving to that world without even focusing on the fact we haven't dealt with the storage challenge, without which we're not going to have full renewables in 20 years, I think is a myth.
Yeah. Could I jump in as well, Hadley? Because I can't agree more, because I think that this is something that has really been overlooked, is that, again, think about critical minerals. I mean, think about the components that you need. I mean, think about cobalt. Like, where does the vast majority of cobalt lie? It relies in the Democratic Republic of Congo. You think about graphite, a critical component for the transition. I mean, 60% of supply is in China, 100% of processing for graphite is in China. And so this conversation about the geopolitics of renewables is going to continue. And while we're in the transition phase, there are going to be fewer and fewer countries and companies that are going to continue to invest in the traditional fossil fuels that we will need in the transition. So I would actually say, in response to Dan Fried, that, there is going to be potentially a longer shelf life for Russian hydrocarbons in this transition, not infinite. But if you look at the coming decade, I mean, it's going to be the Gulf states that are going to continue to invest. It's going to probably be Russian energy companies that are going to continue to invest as Western companies potentially pull back. And so I think that we should get used to and ready for a period of volatile oil prices, which can benefit some of these traditional hydrocarbon states.
Yeah. Melio, come in on this, because obviously sitting in Nigeria, you have a unique perspective on China and Africa, China's growth in terms of their investment, in terms of patents, in terms of, as Halima was mentioning, mineral wealth as well. Where do you see the greatest danger there?
I think for us, maybe good to put it in context. We have a different problem here. We have a huge energy poverty here. We have resource-dependent countries in all of West Africa. Probably, less than 30% of West Africa has access to affordable and accessible energy. And the only way you can do this, can close this gap, is to see how you can use the local resources to see how you can close that gap. And the available local resource that you have is the gas resources that is abundant in 3 or 4 of the countries that can come pull together these resources and close that energy poverty gap. So if you have to do this, you must get financing. And therefore, financing today, in the context of all the conversations around the renewable, is simply don't put money into fossil fuel. And the meaning of this is deepening energy poverty, making it impossible for these countries to transit, in the sense that first, you need the resources of today to build the renewables of tomorrow, and also as a going concern. So this is a really huge challenge for us in the sub-Saharan Africa. And I think the world must look at it very, very deeply. In kind of jurisdiction and location is quite a different challenge here. We really appreciate the issues around the geopolitics of renewable energies, but the reality today in sub-Saharan Africa is that there's a deep energy poverty which the world needs to support, either in form of the renewables or in any other means, because I don't see how else you can create the resources, particularly in some of the energy resource-dependent countries, to build those resources. So I think we have a different, but then it's when you get that resolved that you worry about where's that going to come from? Who is going to manufacture the items? Where am I going to buy it from? Who's going to dominate it? All this don't become very significant. As we migrate, I believe very strongly that we can develop local capacities to create some of this infrastructure that we require to move towards the renewables. Extensive exposure to sun, because solar shouldn't be a problem in this place, but you do need resources even to pay for that. And we're not seeing that traction around in the globe towards supporting weaker countries to make sure that there's investment in the solar so that this energy poverty gap can be closed. Otherwise, people will be left with no options than to get to self-help, and that self won't work without financing. And ultimately, you'll just see a total crash of energy support and access to energy. And I'm not sure this will change anything except that we start working that. And that's what we are doing in Nigeria today. We are seeing how we can deepen our gas infrastructure, build more gas-based power plants, build more gas-based industries, move towards blue hydrogen and very many other things that we know that in the short term, there could be the road to the transition while we continue to develop our renewable energy resources. And I think both of them can work together, but definitely some focus and around some of these countries by geography. Because I'm sure you will appreciate that we have a different challenge here. For instance, only 3% of the global carbon emissions come from Africa. So even if you nail it to zero, you haven't solved any problem. Really what you have created is a new kind of situation. So I think we see in sub-Saharan Africa, we're very, very committed to making sure that we achieve the net zero by 2060. Yes, in my country, but obviously, there's a global recognition that we need help, we need support here to be assisted to exit is very, very necessary. It's not really completely a commercial issue.
Halima, what is this situation in Europe with Russia, Ukraine, NATO, the United States, the broader European narrative, if you will? What is this teaching Beijing about using energy as a weapon, about where to put their support, who to count on? What is it showing them?
I'm not sure I can. Okay, sorry.
Halima, I'm sorry, Melanie.
I think this is, again, we think about the Biden administration when they came into office, all the discussion was about sort of pulling back from the Middle East, sort of freezing the Russian relationship and really focusing on what the United States said was the core, strategic priority was great power competition with China. And what's so interesting is, I heard a panel last week, I think it was Michael McFaul said, other actors have a say in these grand strategies. And so I do think if you're Beijing and you're watching now the US and Europe, this is going to be an incredible challenge if we do have this Russian invasion. Again, we talk about where is the potential additional energy supplies, that can come in to alleviate a real potential energy crisis in Europe. It's not clear there really are supplies forthcoming. And so I think it's going to be interesting to see what leverage points Europe really has at this point. We're talking about more sanctions on Russia if Russia invades Ukraine, but what's going to be the willingness to continue those sanctions in the face of really high, potentially short-term energy prices? So if you're Beijing and you're watching this situation, what are the implications then for Taiwan in terms of what's going to be our willpower to really engage on a lot of these issues? So I think it's going to be a very important test case for the US and Europe, this response to the Ukraine situation.
No doubt about it. And Mr. Ambassador, just to bring you in on that point specifically, I've had multiple conversations with Ukrainians. I'm in constant contact with that government. And I've asked multiple times, if Mr. Putin were to invade Ukraine, how long could you hold them within the context of the weapons that you have and the people that you have on the border? And essentially he said, listen, that's the $1 million question. We don't actually know. We're going to fight until the last man. But this is going to be a narrative, unfortunately, that Mr. Putin is going to continue in the sense of spheres of influence, pushing back on NATO expansion. But he's just one naughty actor right now on the world stage, as we've been discussing. What's your sense of how far Mr. Putin is going to go? Because you were strategically placed in Ukraine to see this on a daily basis. And as they said to me last week, when I was sitting in the country, when the government was attacked in a major cyber outage, we're on the front lines of Russian aggression every day on every single level: financial, cyber, military. What's your sense about where Mr. Putin's going to go?
Putin is in earnest. He wants the empire back. Getting Ukraine under the Kremlin thumb is critical to restoring the Russian Empire. This stuff goes back to the 17th century. Putin is in earnest. But that's not a reason for us to capitulate. That's a reason for us to try to beat him. beating him means helping Ukraine remain free. And, you know, Helena Croft was spot on right. It doesn't matter that the Biden administration wanted a stable and predictable relationship with Russia. Okay, that's nice. You know, I wanted to be a cowboy when I was 6 years old. It doesn't matter what you want. It matters what Putin is going to do. The Biden administration was right when it described the strategic challenge of the world, not just the rise of China, but authoritarians with aggressive designs and repression at home against the world's democracies. That is a better way of thinking about 20th century strategic challenges. And the Biden administration needs to take this seriously, including the problem of Chinese monopoly over future critical technologies, like for renewables. Take this stuff seriously. I'm old enough to remember when the Iron Curtain was considered eternal, when the Soviet Union was considered to be winning the Cold War. Yeah, that's right, up through the mid-1980s. So it's hard for me to be pessimistic in the face of insurmountable difficulties on the road to inevitable disaster, which is every day in foreign policy, when I have a track record of the democracies pulling themselves together and prevailing in the end. It's the short term which gets hairy. Anyway, great discussion. Appreciate the invitation. And I learned a lot from the genuine energy experts I listened to.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador. And that does wrap up our panel. But I just want to go quickly to Francesco before we let everybody go. In terms of that idea of energy as a weapon and the move to renewables, releasing us, in a sense, from that sort of yoke, if you will, of the traditional fossil fuels. How long is it going to take till we get there? I mean, we're talking about the transition now. We've had a major setback. I don't think there's anyone who would deny that in the last several months as a result of multiple factors. But where are we today?
The question is not when we should be there. The question is when we have to be there. And this is very clear in the IPCC report. That is something that says the science say to us, if you want to avoid the dramatic impact of climate change, you have to reduce emission by 45% in 2030 and be carbon neutral around 2050. And I wish to say that this way, we have just published, just to respond and giving some information also on what we are doing on Africa. We have published a report on the occasion of our General Assembly, where it's clear that moving to a cleaner energy system based for renewable will bring a big contribution to the African GDP, to the African jobs, and to the African economy. So going clean is not just for going clean, it's going from going better and ensure a future energy system that is safe and is worth for all people in the planet. So the question is not where we should be. We have to stick to the science and make our economy going in line with what the science is saying to us. Too cryptic?
Go ahead.
No, it's okay. So what I wanted to say, and I think this discussion is the best promotion for who believe that we have to go as soon as possible to the new system. The question again is not the direction of travel because it's there. The problem is the scale and the speed. And the scale and the speed are in the end of the market, but also in the end of the policies. And this discussion is a very clear sign that we have to accelerate and scale up the transition.
Panelists, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining all of us. I'd like to keep you on for another hour, but I know you have lives. I don't. It's okay. Randy, I'm going to hand it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Hadley. What a remarkable conversation. The diversity of views, the insights. We addressed a number of the topics that are part of the Global Energy Agenda 2022. So I encourage everyone to read that. Thank you, Francesco, Halima, Dan, Majid, and Mele, for participating today and for your views and for contributing essays to the Global Energy Agenda as well. Thank you, everyone in the audience, for joining us. This session will be available on the Atlantic Council website, YouTube, and social media. So please share it with your colleagues. I'm sure they will find it interesting. interesting. We have 2 more sessions coming up as ADSW Global Energy Forum. Tomorrow, the role of hydrogen as an energy system integrator. And then on Friday, a conversation on various pathways to net zero. You can watch these sessions live at 8 a.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. GST. Make sure to follow us at AC Global Energy and share your thoughts using the hashtag AC Energy Forum and ADSW 2022. We also hope to see you in person at the Global Energy Forum in the UAE on March 28th and 29th. Again, we'll have more information on this coming soon. Finally, thank you to everyone who put this event together. Olga Hokova, Iveta Kruma, Katie Kenny, Jackson Styron, Zach Tarrant, Bain Ennis, Lizzie Bowen, and Eamon Coughlin. And thank you to the group who worked tirelessly on the Global Energy Agenda publication. Jennifer Gordon, Nemea Haddap, Paul Kistra, Donald Partika, and all of the essay authors. Thank you so much. It's really a tremendous piece of work. Really looking forward to seeing everyone in the audience back here for our conversation on hydrogen tomorrow. Thanks so much.